It's been 130 days since the Supercars Championship was last here at Mount Panorama for the Bathurst 1000. It's a different setting this time though. It's a 500-kilometre event in place of the Bathurst 12-hour. My name is Simon Chapman, Supercars reporter for speedcafe.com. Joined today by Connor O'Brien, our editor-in-chief. This weekend is going to be massive. Returning to the mountain, obviously, it's an interesting setting, something that we're not used to. The weather is something that we're going to have to talk about a little bit as well. But the off-season, there's been all sorts of changes. You know, people changing cars. We've got new drivers coming in. We've got new teams. So where do we start?
Oh, it's been full on, hasn't it? It's been good fun for us to report on. Yeah, look, I mean, I don't think we've come into a season like this where there's so much unknown, really, which is really exciting, I think, as a fan and someone in the sport. So, yeah, there's just been so many changes up drivers and everything like that. I mean, yeah, there's just so many. What storyline do we start with first? I mean, I guess the biggest news in the off-season was Whincup's retirement announcement at the end of this year. He'll move into the role of team principal managing director that Roland Dane currently has held for a long time. But he's got one last shot to get a record 8th championship. What do you reckon? Do you reckon has he got that in him?
Well, how fitting would it be for Jamie Whincup in his final season to get title number 8? You know, obviously Triple 8 Race Engineering, it'll be a great sort of number to line up with the team name and everything that goes along with it. But, you know, he's got a man in his corner as well who's probably going to give him the biggest run for his money all season in Shane van Gisbergen. We saw obviously in the off-season he spent a lot of time racing at home in New Zealand, and we can't forget...
He just can't get enough of it.
Oh, mate, the dude just will jump in anything. He'll jump in a lawnmower and he'd race that too. But I think especially, you know, the back end of last year he really came on quite strong. You know, that Bathurst 1000 win, like he controlled that from start to finish.
Sure. And yeah, look, Shane's going to be really strong, isn't he? But yeah, Jamie as well, Shane's had the upper hand the last few years, slightly, in Triple 8, but Jamie does have a knack of coming good when for the big occasion. He twice qualified on pole for his 500th race start, I think, last year, which was pretty impressive. Yeah, so that's going to be interesting. And then obviously the garage at the top end of pit lane next to them, Shell V Power Racing, it's all new there. They've won 3 teams championships out of the last 4, but 2 new drivers. It's going to be interesting. Don't know exactly what to expect there.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the biggest thing to talk about, really, when you think about it, is obviously we're going to have a different champion for the first time in 3 years. Scott McLaughlin has obviously decided to follow Team Penske out of the sport and go into the IndyCar series over in North America. Fabian Coulthard has decided to leave as well. He's gone to Team Sydney, and sort of the change up within that organisation is obviously that it's now Dick Johnson Racing, and we've got 2 new drivers in Anton De Pasquale and Will Davison. We know Will Davison last year sort of had a rough rub of the green with the coronavirus pandemic and 23 Red Racing having to shut its doors. And ironically, he's sort of come out a lot stronger courtesy of some of those changes within the fold at what was known as DJR Team Penske. So I'm really fascinated to see what Will can do at that team.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I mean, just in general, to not have Scotty McLaughlin there, he's been so dominant the last... Even 2017 when he didn't win the title, he was quite dominant. So, yeah, not having Scotty on the grid is going to be really interesting. But yeah, well, we had a recent Pertec poll where we asked people who they thought would get the upper hand between Davison and De Pasquale, and it was very tight. I think it was about 55% in De Pasquale's favour. We know that Anton's going to be really quick. He always is quick. But Will was massively fast last year. He's been there, done it. Been a runner-up in the championship, been a 2-time Bathurst winner. So for the first time in quite a while, there'll be a genuine 2-pronged attack from DJR, which will be... quite good to see.
Definitely, and I think the key thing to remember here is that whilst Team Penske has moved away from the organisation, by and large the team's the same apart from the drivers. You know, we've still got guys like Ludo Lacroix involved. You know, Ryan Story is still running the show. Ben Croak is still there. You know, there's been a couple of little tweaks in terms of how they've organised their engineering lineup, but you know, for all intents and purposes, it's still the same team. So I expect them to be super quick. I think it'll be fascinating to see what Anton can do in what is arguably probably one of the best cars on the grid. We've seen that with Scott last year.
And that's the other thing, the car hasn't really changed a lot. Obviously next year when we're going to Gen 3 will be a big challenge for those guys. But right now the cars are quite similar to where they were last year. So you would definitely expect that they'll be up there, you know, fighting it out at the front. But I guess a little bit further down pit lane, the other big story, which lingered on for quite some time last year, was David Reynolds. Obviously, last year began a 10-year contract with Erebus Motorsport, and things broke down pretty dramatically, which became quite public and led to a split between those guys. Dave's gone to, found a new old home in Kelly Grove Racing, who in themselves, there's a lot of intrigue there. Rick Kelly's not there anymore. He's stepped back. We've got the Grove family in, bringing extra investment into the team. And yeah, Dave Reynolds, a high-profile guy, comes in alongside Andre Heimgartner there. They're going to be pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and also, don't forget that Dave's had a kid as well. So,
That's absolutely, yeah.
Away from the track, he's had a big change in his life, and you and I have both spoken to him relatively recently, and he seems to have a different energy about him. I think it's fair to say that at the start of last year, after that incident with Anton De Pasquale at Erebus Motorsport, that sort of was the start of the end in some ways, at least for that season. It didn't start well, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse for David, and he was really in a rut. And when it sort of started to emerge that he was going to be on the move and going to Kelly Grove Racing, as it's now known, just talking to him, his aura is just totally different. He's a new person.
And Dave, when Dave's happy, Dave drives fast. He'll say that himself, and he seems happy, which is maybe different to where he was last year. So fascinating. It'll be a great test for Andre too. Andre's been really ultra impressive. He's matched up well against Rick, champion of the sport in previous years. It'll be a great point. Andre's a guy that could be a smoky to replace someone like Whincup next year. If he comes out and does a great job against Dave, you'd think, maybe he might appear on Triple Eight's radar. But it'll be a great test of where Andre really is at, and obviously a fantastic opportunity for Dave to continue his time in supercars and hopefully be back at the front.
100%. We can't forget about Tickford Racing. Obviously, they've had some changes in the off-season. We expected for a long time that they would sort of stay as a 4-car team, despite obviously Tim Blanchard Racing setting up its new operation with Tim Slade, but unfortunately they couldn't get the necessary racing entitlements contract for that to happen. So unfortunately, Lee Holdsworth is out of the sport for now as far as full-time driving goes. We'll see him back at Walkinshaw and Andretti United later this season in the Bathurst 1000. But that team, down to 3 cars, James Courtney, Cameron Waters and Jack LeBrock. There's one standout in that team, obviously, in Cameron Waters. How do you see his season playing out? Last year, the Bathurst 1000, he was runner-up with Will in that Tickford car, the Monster Energy Racing car, to the Red Bull guys. How do you see his season going?
Well, it's a huge opportunity, isn't it? Again, with a similar package to last year, of course everyone's trying to make improvements, but it's a huge opportunity for Cam. He was runner-up in the championship last year to the guy who's not here anymore. Look, Cam's qualifying pace has never, I think, been in question, and he did a fantastic job in the races last year. So 100%. I was speaking to James Courtney yesterday, and he was kind of saying, well, look, we all know our place here, and James himself is taking upon himself to help get Cam, guide him through this process. James, of course, competed for a championship in 2010 and won that, and so there's a really good harmony there. Jack LeBrock fits into the group really well. He had a race win last year, so it seems like a very happy camp down there at Tickford, and I think they can sense an opportunity with some changes up further up the lane that I think this would be a great opportunity for Tickford to sweep, really.
And I guess Walkinshaw and Andretti United are the other team that you'd probably say are there or thereabouts. It's really interesting how that dynamic is sort of playing out. Last year they had a completely new lineup, bringing in obviously young Bryce Fullwood and Chaz Mostert to replace Scott Pye and James Courtney. So where do they sit in your eyes? Chaz went winless last year, which was pretty uncommon for Chaz. In most of his seasons he's had a win. And it looked like maybe there were sort of these glimpses at times where if they just got the car to Chaz's liking, he'd be on top of the pops.
I thought last year was really impressive for Chaz. That was by far Walkinshaw's best season in a long time, possibly since as far back as 2009. I thought that was a really impressive campaign, and I think with a guy like Adam DeBore, he's a smart guy, isn't he? So I think the longer those guys are there, they're going to really be able to make some inroads, and Yeah, that would be, and obviously with Holdsworth joining him for Bathurst, that'll be a mega kind of partnership here. So yeah, those guys I certainly would expect to be in the mix again. So I mean, and Bryce, of course, showed some good signs last year and is a Super 2 Series winner previously. So I'd expect he'll provide some good support. But yeah, who else do you see sort of being kind of threats for maybe a podium or whatnot this year?
Well, it's hard to say, isn't it? Because we had Jamie Whincup come out the other week saying that he reckons as many as 15 drivers could potentially challenge for the championship this year, and that it's more than half the field. It's crazy to think. For the last 3 years, it's basically been the Scott McLaughlin show, and we've not really been able to see anyone else come to the fore. And in the space of a few months, it's gone from Scott's the bona fide champion to just about anyone could win it. So I guess it's an interesting one. There are guys like Mark Winterbottom at Team 18 and Scott Pye who are established names in the sport. You'd hope that someone like Mark, despite going into sort of the twilight of his career, could pull out some performances with Team 18. This is the second year as a two-car operation. Scott Pye's won a race before. I'd hope to see him sort of challenging up the front occasionally. I think last year, if it wasn't for his qualifying, he'd probably be on the top 5 a lot of the times. But qualifying really let him down. Yep,
and they've got Richard Holway in there too now. Into that mix that already included Phil Keed and Manuel Sanchez. So really strong engineering group. Charlie Schwerkold has invested a lot into that team. So I know he's been wanting to build each year, and last year was pretty strong. So I'm sure he's got high hopes for the year ahead. A couple of teams that I guess, but just to go through a couple other changes. Erebus Motorsport probably have changed as much as anyone. Two new guys. We've just seen today Will Brown became the last livery revealed for the year ahead with these WD-40. But what do you think, are those guys going to struggle this year?
I don't know. I'd really like to see Will Brown and Brody Kostecki come out and really make their mark. I think they're both exceptionally talented young drivers, and they're certainly part of that next generation that I think will stick around for a long time, just based purely on the fact that they've got raw talent. Is the team what it used to be though? In the era when David Reynolds was winning the Bathurst 1000, they were at their peak, and sort of since then it hasn't always been rosy. We're still with the inside line. There was, depending on how you look at it, it didn't look like a stable organisation. And some of the stuff that came out last year, obviously with David departing, and then obviously Alistair McVeigh going to Kelly Grove Racing as well. Yep, Dennis Huizer. So there's been a lot of change at Erebus Motorsport, and it feels like they're going back to square one. And
but that could be a good thing, right? Because it could be a clean slate, right? To start again. I know they're excited by the energy and enthusiasm that guys like Will and Brody bring in. They've got young guys like Tom Moore in key roles now.
Maybe it's what they need.
Yeah, exactly. So, to start again, and the other team, obviously, where there's been a double change is Team Sydney. They've got Fabian Coulthard in there as the lead guy, and Gary Jacobson in there as well. This is the second year of them, under the Team Sydney banner since changing from Techno Autosports. Do you think there'll be a step forward for those guys?
I don't know. They're another one that's got a question mark over their head, I think. Fabian's definitely capable. We know what he can do. We know that he can win races. I feel like maybe he was held back a little bit at DJR Team Penske as it was known then. I feel like maybe, since maybe the last time he was at Brad Jones Racing, maybe this is the first opportunity since then that he can really take a package and really tailor-make it to himself.
Exactly. Well, and, I think Fabian at one point said it himself. It was well known that Fabian and Scott drive the car very differently, and the team was developed around Scott's driving style, which was obviously not favourable to how Fabian wanted a car driven. He has the chance here. I know when I spoke to him at the Queensland Raceway pre-season test, he was excited to have the opportunity to lead the team, to develop it the way he wants it to be developed. So I think it's going to be a really refreshing challenge for him. I would also think that it's going to be the shoes on the other foot now. He's now in the part where the team's fully built around him. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there's a bit more of a struggle for Gary, because I think all the resources are going to probably be directed towards Fabian, who's got Jeffrey Slater as his race engineer. Jeffrey's a very talented guy. Obviously, he was there during Techno's heydays. So I think, I wouldn't be surprised if Fabian has some good results, but clearly it's not going to be the same as where he's come from at the top end of pit lane.
Totally.
The other two teams we haven't mentioned just quickly were Brad Jones Racing, 4 cars,
They've got stability.
All 4 drivers the same, 3 engineers the same, and Julian Stannard steps back from Macaulay Jones as race engineer, but is guiding Tom Wettenhall, who comes in there. So almost complete stability there, and some new sponsors aboard with Coca-Cola and the like. I think they'll be consistent again. And Matt Stone Racing, 2 young guys. I think again it's going to be a building year for them. 2 guys that have come out of their Superlight program. Very young engineering squad too, I think, as well. General staff as well as 2 very young drivers. So, they've got some exciting stuff there, but it's going to take some time, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. It's, for those guys, this is, in some ways, it's year 1, isn't it? They basically did a split Super 2 program inside the Supercars field. So, yeah, I think for those 2, it'll be interesting to see how they go. I don't think, we're going to see fireworks from them, but, with the way that the race formats are this year, maybe that will work into their favour. We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, we can't forget the Blanchard Racing team, new to the Supercars grid this year, but obviously some familiar faces and familiar names. Tim Blanchard, obviously with his racing entitlements contract, has taken that from Brad Jones Racing to start his new team. Tim Slade will be driving that car. Sladey probably had the best timing as far as falling out of the Supercars Championship goes, because last year there wasn't much really to be done as far as racing. So he sort of lucked in a little bit, which is fortunate. So I'll be interested to see how Tim goes. They've got that Tickford Racing Ford Mustang, which at the hands of Will Davison was really fast.
Yep.
So, but does having the car being fast necessarily translate into them being quick on the pace?
I think there's still going to be some teething problems, isn't there? Like, even if it is a proven driver and a team that's sort of been around anyway, I think naturally there's going to be some teething problems. I would expect they'll compete for top 5s at points, but I'd more expect them to be kind of in the midfield in general. But a great looking car. Probably one of my, I know you and I both think it's probably up there as one of the best looking cars on the grid. So hopefully those guys, have all the best for those guys for the year ahead. But yeah, look, we'll get back to the bottom line here. We've got to make our prediction. Obviously you being a Kiwi, you're going to pick, a New Zealander, no doubt, to win the championship. I take it.
Well, I've got one left to pick from, and if he was here, I'd probably be choosing Scott, undoubtedly. But after last year and the way that it finished with Shane and having that really dominant performance, all of his racing that he's done in the off season at home in New Zealand, and just showing his work ethic, I can't go past Shane. And that's not just Kiwi bias. It's just, I think he's in the form of his life. You can't go past him as far as what he's shown in years past. Maybe the start of the season didn't start off great with the incident at Adelaide, but from there he was pretty quick.
I hate to be boring, but I actually agree. I think I think Shane's pretty hard to go past. I'm not sure that there's a better driver on the grid right now in a very strong team. There's going to be no doubt. There's plenty of guys who can contend. I think Shane's the man to beat though. But a dark horse who, just quickly as well, dark horse who do you think might be a surprise for? I'm going to say someone like Nick Percat always gets the best out of the package there at BJR. They had certainly ups and downs last year, but I'd say you can never rule Nick Percat out of some surprise results. So, well, not even a surprise anymore, to be honest.
Definitely. I think Brad Jones Racing at times last year really came on song. I think that end result for Nick Percat in the driver's standings wasn't necessarily indicative of what he was capable of, and especially...
And he still finished 7th. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was massive. I really want to back Chaz Mostert. I think, he's... You and I both know he plays it down a lot, it's just, if everything comes together, we'll be there or thereabouts. But I really want Chaz, and I know it's only his second season with Walkinshaw and Andretti United, but I think this could be his year potentially to be on the money and really up there. But like we said earlier, Jamie's right. There are so many guys who can win this championship. Cameron Waters can win this championship.
Sure.
Will Davison can win this championship.
I love the romance of an 8th title for Whincup on his swan song season. Yeah, Will Davison would be a fairy tale story. But yeah, seeing a new champion like a Cameron Waters or something would be great for the sport too. But I think we've got a pretty interesting year ahead of us. Last year using these cars before we move into Gen 3, so everything's on the line, and I guess we'll see who comes out on top.
Definitely. And to stay up to speed with all your motor racing news, head to speedcafe.com. And if you want to be notified, head to speedcafe.com/connected. My name is Simon Chapman. This is Connor O'Brien. Stay up to speed with the Castrol live updates this weekend at the Mount Panorama 500. We're looking forward to a massive weekend of motor racing, and hopefully we'll see you there.